we are looking for as we zoom out from inside the spacecraft and right back in with a big thumbs up from the crew. Those seats will be articulating upwards, and they are doing so now, putting them in launch position. This will allow the commander and pilot to have access to their displays that you see just above them. This is also helpful to the astronauts who can't spend forever on your back. It's a comfortable position, I'm sure, but there are...
SpaceX seats are in the launch position.
There are concerns that, and I know this from the Artemis missions, that you can only spend so much time on your back. So with SpaceX and the late load, it's very convenient. It's a very short amount of time that they spend on their back before going up into space. And now we're getting some of those comm checks.
Can see those long giraffe legs with good view right there.
There it is. Jessica mentioning something that we saw at the beginning of the launch broadcast. If you want to scroll back and take a look at that, they have unofficial logo on their shirts. I believe they were wearing them in a press conference. They had their flight suits on, so I couldn't see underneath, but it was the same peach color that you showed, but it was basically a graphic of 3 giraffes and 1 panda. And each one of those animals was assigned one of the crew members, and Anne McLean got the panda.
The pandas are actually my favorite animal, from the time that I was a very small child, so I kind of like how that worked out. And certainly not short. I think she's 5'7", but there it is. There's the logo. The rest of her crew is exceptionally tall in the astronaut corps, so when Anne stands with them, she comes off a little bit more panda-like, I would say.
So the next few milestones we should see.
Dragon, SpaceX, you are go for Section 2, suit leak check preparation.
That's right, is suit leak check. This is the second of the day.
Copies, we are go for Section 2, suit leak check prep.
So you will, after that brief initial comm check, they will suit leak check. And so you will see the suits inflate. They'll put their visors down. And then when that is complete, they'll do a full complement of communication checks with each one of the crew members. But right now it's suit leak check. So they're about to inflate. As we await this this next milestone, I want to go back to what you were talking about in the memories of being in space, and how clear are the memories of your spacewalk when you were outside the space station, dangling in essence, looking down at the planet. Did you have a moment where you were able to just take it all in, to pause?
Yeah, again, as we were talking about earlier, you have to be intentional about stealing a few of those moments for yourselves, especially when it comes to spacewalks. Spacewalks are the riskiest thing that we do. They're the most challenging, both mentally and physically. So it really does demand 100% of your focus and concentration to make sure that you are doing the right thing for the piece of hardware that you're trying to repair or replace, or whatever the task is that you're doing, and most importantly, to keep you and your partner safe. So that really demands a very, very high level of concentration. And, the astronaut mantra is always kind of echoing in your head of like, don't make a mistake, don't make a mistake. So you have to remember, you get very caught up in the task and the minutia of what you're doing.
SpaceX Dragon, Section 2, 2.9, care complete, ready for leak checks.
So there were a few moments that I did. I thought, okay, I need to look down. I need to appreciate
SpaceX
this.
copies. You are go for Section 3, suit leak check.
Please go for Section 3, suit leak check.
And one of those moments was when I was actually in the foot restraint that we have that you really secures you in one position. And I was working with one of the batteries that we had, and Christina was below me. And as I looked down, I saw the view. We were actually coming over those Patagonia ice fields that I was describing earlier, which is one of my favorite spots. And I remember seeing that and just waiting for a second and thinking, okay, wow, this is pretty extraordinary, you know. That first moment you come out of the hatch as well, when you see your boots below you and then nothing else until Earth. And that's certainly different than the way that we train in the pool, where you see the bottom of the pool always.
Right.
And that, it's really, of course, you're moving around the Earth, but the sense of movement and motion that you have is that the Earth is spinning very quickly below you. And it's really an extraordinary feeling. I remember as well, Christina and I were under the airlock. We had a moment to had a pause, and we flew right over San Diego, where I went to graduate school. And so we took a moment there to make a shout out to all of my friends and colleagues that live there. But, really easy to pick out those coastal cities, because you have those landmarks when you're looking down at the Earth and you don't have the benefit of the borders drawn on a map. A lot of times geography can be pretty challenging. So those coastal areas are the easy ones to pick out. Depending on what you're doing on a spacewalk, though, there can actually be pretty long opportunities that you have to appreciate the moment. And I was really jealous. I remember when I was inside flying the robotic arm, Luca Parmitano and Drew Morgan were doing a spacewalk to fix the AMS, the alpha magnetic spectrometer. And there was this one period of time where Luca was just riding the end of the Canadarm, the robotic arm on the space station built by the Canadian Space Agency, and he was just riding it for a very long time. He wasn't holding anything, he was just riding it and really looking off into the solar system and the universe. And if you know Luca, he's a talker, and he started getting quite philosophical as well, and talking about what he saw and how he felt. And I was always very envious of that opportunity, because I didn't have one of those natural lengths of downtime where you had really the opportunity to do that. But you never know. On my next flight, hopefully I'll have one of those as well.
Well, I hope so for you as well, because it just sounds spectacular. What an honor and a privilege to be able to do that. Well, it looks like we're getting some inflation, right? Whenever the helmet starts to ride up the face, means we got some pressure in there.
Yep.
Another social question for you, Jessica. Zryan Dox asks, what happens if the astronauts felt the need to scratch? Oh my goodness.
Yeah, that is
Hope
a
they're not
good
listening.
question. Good question, and unfortunately, often there isn't a lot that you can do. You can see right now they're already finished up with those pressure checks, so it wasn't a very long time. You saw Kirill actually reached right in and scratched his nose, so he looked like he did have something like that.
Right, next Dragon, suit leak check complete for nominal suits.
SpaceX copies and concurs for good suits. Additionally, at this time, I have an update on the hydraulics issue that LD briefed during the weather briefing, if you're ready to copy.
There we go.
All right. The hardware is healthy, but we are currently still evaluating system performance. We want to provide an update no later than T-minus 1 hour. If additional time is needed, the final call just needs to be made prior to LES arm, but still expect an update from us no later than T-minus 1 hour. How copy?
Can we copy the update? We'll expect an update prior to 1 hour and understand the constraint with the LAS Army. Thank you.
So we've mentioned this at the top of the launch broadcast, and another time not long after that, that the crew, SpaceX team on the ground, is evaluating an issue with
Dragon
hydraulics.
SpaceX at this time. Closeout team will perform final closeout steps next to the capsule. Your go to proceed to Section 4, side hatch close, and report when ready to close the hatch.
Dragon, copies. Section 4 and work.
So that applies to the team on the left, to the call out that you just heard, as they ready to close the side hatch for Dragon. But back to the brief that was just given to the Crew 10 crew regarding the hydraulics on the ground, and they are currently looking at an issue that is related to hydraulic lines or a hydraulic issue with the clamp arm that holds the Falcon 9 rocket to the transporter erector. Again, there's an issue with the hydraulics related to the clamp arms, and there you see them, and that holds the rocket to the transporter erector. They're evaluating an issue with the hydraulics in one of those clamp arms. So they're working through the data, evaluating the situation. They're going to take some more time to look at this, and told the crew that they will give them an update in about an hour, but they have to make a call on which way this will go, whether they build flight rationale to go ahead and fly, or if it's something that would require us to stand down for the day. That will be something that they are discussing right now, but they can make that final call just before the arming of the launch escape system. We just completed suit leak checks. Crew 10 is in their seats. Moving forward.
Yeah, and to finish off that last question about what happens if you get an itch when you've got your visor closed.
Yes.
So different spacesuits have, different interiors. If you think about the EMU, the extravehicular mobility unit, that's the spacesuit that we use for our spacewalks on the International Space Station. There are a couple things that you can maybe use to itch a little bit if you have something on your nose or somewhere on your face. There's a Valsalva device that's actually mounted on the visor, and that helps you clear your ears when you're changing pressure. So sometimes if you have an itch, especially on your chin or nose, you can kind of wiggle your face down to clear it that way, to scratch it a little bit with that Valsalva device. You also have a little, the nipple for a camelback water reservoir. It's kind of like that, but it's mounted on the inside of our spacesuit, and you can use that to try to get at us, to scratch that itch if you have one.
One of the factors that they're looking at on launch day, of course, is the weather, and it couldn't be much better than this. 95% go, winds 12 to 17 miles per hour out of the southeast, temperature 67 degrees expected at launch time. We're in the 70s as we speak, and it has just been delightful outside. SpaceX and NASA not only look at weather at the launch site, though, but also around the world, making sure conditions are acceptable if Dragon has to splash down in the Atlantic in case of an emergency. So, of course, teams are monitoring contingency splashdown locations if the crew had to come back to Earth before docking with the space station. If this were to happen, SpaceX and NASA would coordinate with the Department of Defense and the Coast Guard to ensure crew safety upon splashdown, including ships and air assets to patrol the 10 nautical mile keep-out zone. This is, of course, to mitigate safety concerns for any boaters approaching the area. The weather brief that they got at the top of the launch broadcast was that conditions along the ascent corridor were good. They did have some winds that were teetering right on the line, but they were expecting them to go down. And how about that? What a beautiful view. A nice sailboat off in the distance, though I'm wondering if that is okay.
Yeah.
now that I think about it.
Looks like it might be a violation, and I know that that actually prevented a few or delayed a few shuttle launches in the past, didn't it? Right, boats that were in the area that weren't supposed to be there.
It did indeed. I can tell you with a fair amount of certainty that as lovely as a day as it is to be out sailing, they are not supposed to be in that location. Now, the area is cleared by the range, so we'll wait for an update from the range to find out what the situation is there.
See, there's not a cloud in the sky, so that's another nice feature for the viewing today. Sometimes if there are a few clouds interspersed, you lose your view for a minute or two once it gets above that cloud later, but that should not be a concern for today.
Yeah. The high pressure system that's in the area literally swept out all the moisture and storms that we had earlier in the week. We had a cold front pass through on Tuesday, or Monday rather.
Dragon SpaceX for hydraulic checks. Just giving an update that they're about to start an additional set of kinematics tests on the hydraulic system, so you may feel or hear some valves clicking, but this is expected.
Thanks for the heads up.
So SpaceX informing the crew that they will be hearing some noise as SpaceX cycles hydraulic valves. This is a situation that they are evaluating in this moment.
Dragon SpaceX closeout team is taking final steps in prep for side hatch closure. Stand by for transition to pad hatch closed. Ensure all items remain secure from now through launch.
Copy.
And there you see the crew closing the hatch. But again, back to the hydraulic issue, SpaceX cycling those valves as they work an issue with some ground equipment, the hydraulic lines, and the system that feeds the clamp arms, which holds the rocket to the pad. A note about that boat that we saw earlier, there is still plenty of time to clear the range. And so I don't know this for sure, but it's possible that the boat may be getting a visit, but certainly could get out of there. There are notices that are put out called NOTAMs. They are notices to mariners and aviators in the area that lets them know that a launch will be going off this evening. And the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station, the 45th Space Wing, has the responsibility for the range. And of course, again, plenty of time to clear the range before liftoff. Currently sitting at T-minus 2 hours and 10 minutes and counting. You're watching live launch coverage of NASA and SpaceX's Crew 10 mission to the International Space Station. 2 hours ago, the crew made their way out of astronaut crew quarters. After they suited up, they got into their rides, drove out to the launch pad, ascended the launch tower, walked across the crew access arm and into the Dragon Endurance capsule that you see there. The Endurance spacecraft currently on its 4th flight. The flight leader in the fleet currently. The crew is now inside the capsule, and the team there at SpaceX performing some leak checks to make sure the capsule is airtight.
Another question.
We've been taking your social media questions throughout our live launch coverage. Keep them coming. Hashtag AskNASA on Facebook, X, YouTube, and Twitch. Our next question comes from Spooky Sniper asking, Jessica, what's one challenge of spaceflight that most people don't really think about?
Well, one thing that comes to mind is the challenge that we face when we come back home, because you've been operating in this really intense, novel, exciting environment for 6 months, 7 months in my case, even longer for some of the recent missions. And every day you're intertwined with all of the systems of the space station, all the experiments, everything that's going on. And it's, your participation, all the work that you're doing is critical and crucial to the success of those experiments, to keeping the space station alive and healthy. And there's a lot of meaning in your work. You have these very busy days that are all laid out and planned by the ground teams. And then you leave the space station and the transition is quite sudden. You come back, you have to contend with gravity again, which doesn't feel great for your body. And you think about it, you're thinking, well, wait a minute, I left, and somehow the space station's up there still doing just fine with another crew that's taking care of it, but you're personally no longer connected to it and responsible for those everyday operations. And it's quite a difference from when you come back. And I think especially for astronauts on their first missions, I've talked to quite a few astronauts about it.
SpaceX, are you ready for comm checks with MD, LD, and DC?
SpaceX Dragon, ready for comm check.
Copy. I'll initiate the teacher's comm check. Dragon, SpaceX, comm check.
SpaceX Dragon, loud and clear.
Core, loud and clear. Teacher's comm check complete. Stand by for comm checks with DC, MD, and LD in the launch configuration.
Dragon, DC on countdown 1, comm check.
DC Dragon, loud and clear.
DC, loud and clear. Stand by for comm checks with MD.
Dragon, MD on countdown 1, comm check.
MD Dragon, loud and clear.
MD, loud and clear. Stand by for comm check over Dragon to ground. Dragon, MD on Dragon to ground, comm check.
MD Dragon, loud and clear.
MD, loud and clear. Stand by for comm checks with LD.
Dragon, LD on countdown 1, comm check.
LD Dragon, loud and clear.
LD, loud and clear. Stand by for comm check over Dragon to ground. Dragon, LD on Dragon to ground, comm check.
LD Dragon, also loud and clear.
LD, loud and clear.
Dragon, SpaceX, launch configuration comm checks complete.
Dragon, SpaceX Dragon, copy.
Yeah, so to wrap up that last question, when you return from spaceflight, some astronauts, including myself, have kind of had this feeling of aimlessness almost. You've just accomplished this number one goal that you've had, this dream you've had your entire life from the time that I was 5 years old, from my perspective. And I actually returned at the time of COVID, so it was coming back to a completely different planet. But, finding, again, your purpose and your mission it's probably something that most people don't think about when they think about the challenges of spaceflight.
All right, we are T-minus 2 hours and 5 minutes and counting until liftoff of NASA and SpaceX's Crew 10 mission to the International Space Station, an incredible orbiting lab, and of course, their final destination for Crew 10 Let's take a closer look now at how we're getting help here on Earth from all of that revolutionary science and research being done up in low Earth orbit.
be part of the reason why we're having problems with our eyes. Many astronauts are coming back with some deficits to their vision and even some anatomical changes to the back of the eye. It's a syndrome called SANS, Spaceflight Associated Neuroocular Syndrome. So this thigh cuff experiment will provide a lot of data to see if this could be used as a countermeasure to help counteract some of those effects. There's also an experiment called immunity assay, which is a new way to monitor health and immune function with a blood sample in space. So this is looking at a new assay that can be conducted in flight instead of what we usually do is obtain a blood sample and then we have to wait until that blood sample makes its way back to the ground before we can really get a good look to understand what's going on there. Once they're on ISS, some of the astronauts will be participating in the CIPHER study, and this is a very comprehensive physiological suite. It's a multidisciplinary study looking at physiological and psychological factors, and it's 14 different studies all wrapped into one big blanket. And it's really looking at comparing and contrasting long-duration missions in the future, missions of different durations, and getting a really comprehensive understanding of all of those different physiological systems, again, with some of the applications to SANS like we were talking about. Another experiment called Drain Brain 2.0. This one's looking at blood flow between the heart and the brain, uses a special neck collar to understand what's going on with those dynamics with blood flow between the heart and the brain in microgravity. There are some more combustion experiments. We saw that in the video, something that we do on almost every ISS mission these days because, of course, even flames burn differently in space. We don't have convection, air is moving differently, and that has led us to a lot of breakthroughs in understanding more about how fire burns, what makes up these different constituents of flames. This mission, they'll be doing experiments called SOFI, and that will be looking at the different models for flammability with applications toward future space missions and also some terrestrial applications for combustion models. So as you can see, you heard the astronauts talk about it in the video. We do all kinds of science from all different aspects. When you remove this elephant in the room that is gravity, this variable that's present in all experimental models forever from the beginning of time on Earth. If you remove that, who knows what results can happen. So it's a really, really exciting place to do science.
I'm most fascinated by the human aspect, especially what you talked about with how fluid flows inside of the body. Did you notice anything with your vision when you came back?
Well, good question. Yeah, I actually did have a pretty extreme case of SANS, and so it was something that when I was on orbit, I did a lot of extra exams and images. So we actually have an OCT machine on board the International Space Station. So this is a machine that we can use to look at the back of our eye, to look at the retina, the choroid, and understand really the anatomy of the eyeball and the surrounding structures. So I actually did have a pretty extreme shift. My only real symptom, and the only thing that has lasted until now, is that I have perfect vision. I actually wore contacts or glasses before I went to space, and for me, so one of the hallmarks of SANS is that you can have a flattening of the back of the eyeball, so this changes the refraction, and for me, my prescription was just this magic amount that was completely counteracted by this change that I had in my eyeball. So now I have 20/15 vision.
How about that?
And that's persisted for 5 years. Yeah, I usually refer to it as the most expensive corrective surgery. Thank you to the taxpayers. But that is all of the other anatomical changes to my eye have returned to normal, so nobody's really concerned about the health of my eyeball, but I still have this perfect vision.
How about that? Wow. So if I go up into space, I can potentially lose my glasses?
Well, for most people it actually makes their vision a little bit worse, but it depends on where you start. So we'll have to look into your prescription. If it's nearly the same as mine, then you might have the same result.
Then I need to go to space to get it fixed. Forget LASIK. That's really interesting, Jessica. Thank you for sharing that with us. We are currently T-minus 1 hour and 55 minutes and counting from liftoff of the Falcon 9 from Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center. Crew 10 currently inside Dragon Endurance. So far, they've completed their comm checks to make sure they can communicate with the teams here on the ground. Their seats have rotated upright to their reclined launch position. That allows them to see and access their display panels, as you can see there on the right-hand side of your screen. They've also completed their suit leak checks to make sure that their spacesuits are working properly. And now you see the closeout team making sure that that side hatch has a good seal. If you've been watching us since we came on air, I'm NASA's Daryl Nail with NASA, and I mentioned that twice. NASA astronaut Jessica Meir is here as well, providing outstanding audio commentary. We're going to expand our live coverage in a little more than an hour from now, or actually a little less than an hour from now. We'll come on and bring our SpaceX commentators online, as long as our NASA commentator in Hawthorne, California. Here's another look at the crew going into space today. The Crew 10 commander is NASA astronaut Anne McClain. She's a West Point graduate and U.S. Army colonel who has spent 204 days in space and completed 2 spacewalks. She's a highly decorated Master Army aviator with over 2,000 flight hours, and she even played for the USA Rugby Women's National Team.
Yeah, that's right. My classmate Anne. She's a natural leader, and she is exactly where she should be, leading this crew to space today.
Your Crew 10 pilot is NASA astronaut Nicole Ayers, a U.S. Air Force major and graduate of the Air Force Academy. Nicole has flown the T-38 and the F-22 Raptor, logging over 1,400 flight hours, including 200 in combat. This will be her first spaceflight, making history as the first astronaut from NASA's 2021 class to fly.
You know, to add another dimension, Nicole also minored in Russian while she was at the Air Force Academy. So lots of, we talked about shared language earlier, and in a literal sense as well here for these crew.
Very helpful in this mission and this flight, and better communicating with her mission specialist, cosmonaut Kirill Peskov. Our mission specialist, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi. He's returning to space for his second mission, a former commercial pilot. He spent 113 days aboard the space station in 2016 and became the first Japanese astronaut to capture the Cygnus spacecraft. When he's not training, he enjoys flying, hiking, movies, and playing the sax.
When they reach the space station, Anne will hand over her commander duties to Tak. Tak will actually become the commander of the space station, and he'll be the third JAXA astronaut to serve in that role after Koichi Wakata and Aki Hoshide.
Taking advantage of his experience as a flight controller on the ground that he did right after his first space flight. The second mission specialist is Roscosmos cosmonaut Kirill Peskov, a former airline co-pilot. This will be his first trip to the International Space Station. Trained in skydiving, zero gravity, scuba diving, and wilderness survival, he's ready for the challenges of space.
Kirill is always finding adventure on this planet. He has that sort of adventurous spirit, so he's always exploring every environment he's in, and I'm sure that this will be even more special for him, having that natural sense of exploration and adventure in him when he sees the Earth for the first time from above.
A fine crew, all 4 of them pilots. 2 military pilots, 2 commercial pilots. They all speak the common language of aviation. We are T-minus 1 hour and 50 minutes until liftoff of NASA's SpaceX Crew 10 mission. We have 3 astronauts and 1 cosmonaut inside of Dragon Endurance atop a Falcon 9 rocket from Launch Pad 39A at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida, and they are headed to the International Space Station to help maintain the orbiting lab. Once on board the International Space Station, Crew 10 will become members of Expedition 73. As Jessica wonderfully explained, they will conduct research to understand material flammability, contributing to future spacecraft design, and study how spaceflight affects human physiology and psychology, an important aspect as well. The crew will also engage with students worldwide via ham radio, and they will use existing hardware with newly integrated software to test a backup lunar navigation solution, helpful for our Moon to Mars program. Yeah, just want to clarify, they will become part of Expedition 73. 72 is currently on the station. And there you see some of our crew members from Crew 9.
Yeah, that's right. The expeditions actually change over with the Soyuz launches. So the next Soyuz launch will actually, Johnny Kim's launch on April 8th with Sergei Ryzhikov and Alexei Zubritsky, that will mark the beginning of Expedition 73.
So far, we've had a pretty smooth countdown. Everything going well with the astronauts. As you can see, they are inside the spacecraft Endurance. The spacecraft is in good shape. The launch vehicle, the Falcon 9 rocket, also in good shape. The crew, they're ready to go. Flight controllers in Houston are also ready. The only issue that they're currently working is regarding a hydraulic system that feeds one of the clamp arms on the transporter erector. That clamp arm helps hold down the Falcon 9 rocket before liftoff. The crew was updated about this, and SpaceX is currently working it with teams from NASA. They expect an update in about a half hour, and they can make a final call on which way they're going to go prior to the launch escape system being armed. That happens around T-minus 45 minutes. Let's take you now inside Mission Control in Houston, where flight controllers are constantly monitoring the International Space Station and the people living on board. I believe we have Leah Cheshire with us live at the Johnson Space Center in Texas. Good afternoon.
That's right, and thank you, Daryl. This is Mission Control Houston in the International Space Station's flight control room here at NASA's Johnson Space Center, where the team continues to prepare for launch, and they are led by Flight Director Ron Spencer. Today, we will be launching the 10th rotational crew mission to the International Space Station under the agency's Commercial Crew Program. Now, following Crew 10's arrival, the space station will have a total of 11 crew members aboard for just a few days. Part of those 11 crew members include the Crew 9 cadre, and that's including NASA astronauts Nick Hague, Butch Wilmore, and Sonny Williams, alongside Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. Now, during the next few days, Crew 10 will go over handover procedures with the off-going Crew 9. That includes a safety briefing and an orientation, and then the new crew will jump right in to help advance scientific knowledge and demonstrate new technologies. After a few days of handover activities, the members of Crew 9 will prepare for their undocking and return to Earth. Those direct handovers between the crews allow for continuity of the activities and help to ensure a continuous U.S. presence on the International Space Station, which, if you can believe it, we're now at 24 years and counting. Ahead of Crew 9's return, NASA astronaut Sonny Williams already turned over command of the space station to Roscosmos cosmonaut Alexei Ovchinin. In just a few weeks, NASA astronaut Johnny Kim and Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Ryzhikov and Alexei Zubritsky will join the on-orbit crew. Shortly after the departure of the Soyuz MS-26 with NASA astronaut Don Pettit, he'll be coming home, and that'll mark the commencement of Expedition 73, led by the new commander, JAXA astronaut Takuya Onishi, who is launching today. We are now at an hour and 45 minutes until liftoff, so I'm going to send it back to you at Kennedy, Daryl and Jessica.
Thank you very much, Leah. Appreciate the update there from Mission Control in Houston, Texas. T-minus 1 hour and 43 minutes and counting until liftoff of NASA and SpaceX's Crew 10 mission to the International Space Station. You're looking at the members of Crew 10 on your screen. From left to right, Mission Specialist Kirill Peskov. To his right, Pilot Nicole Ayers. To her right, Commander Anne McClain, just a bit out of screen. And all the way on the right side of Commander Anne McClain, is Takuya Onishi, a JAXA astronaut returning to space for the second time. As Crew 10 prepares to launch, they are allowed to have a few personal items with them for their roughly 4-month stay in space. A few of the things they're taking up. We asked Anne McClain. She said that her and her crew were able to pack some personal gear to meet them on the ISS. It's going to go up on SpaceX 32 in April. She packed some sports team shirts and schools she attended, along with some holiday gifts for the crew. Commander McClain said, most importantly, she was able to pack a memento for multiple people who worked on this flight to support either her personally or the mission as a whole. And of course, she's going to bring those items back and return them to their owners after flight. And they include things like pins, necklaces, and rings. For Takuya, he's taken a lot of pictures of his family, friends, and colleagues up with him. Also some school banners, which is pretty common with the astronaut corps to take up various school and university paraphernalia. I think I remember your brown university sweatshirt.
Departed the crew arm.
SpaceX Dragon, copies.
There you see the closeout crew, Jessica, making their way off the launch tower, something you remember well from Crew 2.
Yeah, absolutely. Now they're going to probably proceed to one of the other towers where SpaceX has a small control center, and they'll be able to watch from there.
How's the view out there?
It's pretty phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's really any bad view, especially when you're watching a rocket take off around here. I think that is one of the closer viewing areas, though,
I would think
maybe
so.
a little bit closer than some of the other viewing sites.
The closeout crew, if you missed it earlier, of course, is mostly SpaceX members, but it does include one member of the astronaut corps. In this case, it's Chris Birch, a NASA astronaut who is helping out. As Crew 10 launches, that means Crew 9 will return home soon. Crew 9 launched from Pad 40 at the Cape Canaveral Space Force Station back on September 28th of 2024. That was a unique flight because it was only 2 crew members in order to make room for Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams, who flew up on a Boeing Starliner test flight, but are going to be coming down in those 2 open seats with Crew 9. They've been part of Expedition 72, along with Crew 9. Wilmore and Williams have been living and working on the space station now for over 9 months. The other two for a little over 5 months. Once Crew 10 arrives, there will be what's called a direct handover for 4 days, or what they call 2+2, which is shorter than usual. And then Crew 9 will undock. Talk to us about that handover period and why it's different this time, Jessica.
Yeah, so it depends on who is on board for the handover time. When it's a new astronaut, you have a little bit more of what we call kind of adaptation time. It really is dependent on what's happening on the space station as well, though. In particularly busy times, if there are a lot of repairs or a lot of experiments that have to happen in that specific timeline, the amount of hours that we have for the handover available will vary. But we try to have certain periods of allotted time where you have time to just have some really handover with the existing crew up there so they can show you the ropes. You know, we have such incredible training, really extensive on all the pieces of hardware and some of the experimental pieces of hardware as well, but nothing really prepares you for the nuances of what the actual situation is on board. So it's really important to get those tips and tricks from the experienced astronauts, and even for the second-time flyers like Anne and Tak, the space station is a different place than it is when they were on it previously. There's probably some different pieces of hardware and some different systems. Things may be done a little bit differently than when they were there before. So they'll get a lot of insight into operations up there and just really kind of get used to doing things.
And that 2+2 is 2 travel days and 2 days of direct handover?
Yeah, it's 2 days of real handover where the two crews are really overlapping and have that dedicated time to hand over activities, and then the other two is one arrival day and one departure day. So that's what makes up that 2+2. And these handover times can be really variable. We strive to have enough handover so that we, can instill enough confidence in that new crew before the previous experienced crew departs. But we are so tied in with the ground teams now, and we also have been operating up there for so many years. This November will actually mark the 25th year of continuous human presence on the International Space Station.
Isn't that amazing?
So it is truly an incredible feat, but because of that, we've done things a lot of times now. We had pretty well potted procedures. So sometimes that handover, it can be replaced by our interactions with the ground team as well. We strive to maintain as much of it as we can, but sometimes coming and goings of different activities and different spacecraft dictate differences in that plan. And also, we are aiming for this 4-day handover period, but we don't know exactly what it will end up as because, of course, we have to have good weather conditions back on the ground before we will undock Crew 9's vehicle. So in the end, we could have a slightly different than this 2+2 handover that we're expecting, but we have to plan for something.
It really can vary, as you mentioned, because splashdown weather is a critical component, as you mentioned, before the crew can come down, and that's pretty unpredictable for where they will be coming down. Though I was talking to one of our meteorologists here at the Kennedy Space Center, and I asked, well, we have such wonderful weather this time of year. Is it more beneficial this time of year, to be launching and doing the missions? And says, well, not necessarily. Winds really get kicked up this time of year. We have fronts coming through. We had one come through. Winds today, you can see the flags blowing out there by our press site at Launch Complex 39. They're pretty tame today, just in the teens. But earlier, when that front first went through, we even had a tornado pop up in the central Florida area. So winds are a watch item, and they will certainly be something that they will be looking at in the Gulf and the Atlantic, where we have opportunities for the splashdown sites. But to the point of weather, they added a location in Tortuga, which is not far from Key West, just to give them more options for getting ideal weather in ideal sea states. One thing you don't want is the astronauts bouncing around after they've just gotten back from space in seas that are like 10 feet, That would be terrible.
Right, exactly. Certainly would not be appreciated by the astronauts, but more importantly, those limits exist because of the structural components of the vehicle itself. So we want to make sure that we still can make everybody and the people inside in the vehicle safe when they're landing, and that's why we have those wind requirements, which relate also to the height of the waves.
We are currently at T-minus 1 hour and 32 minutes and counting until the Crew 10 flies to the International Space Station. We're getting ready to do a health check in just a few minutes of the launch escape system. Of course, the launch escape system, a critical component of the Endurance spacecraft. You're looking at the crew right there. On the left, Roscosmos cosmonaut and mission specialist Kirill Peskov.
Yeah, that launch escape system will be armed 2 minutes before they start loading the propellant, and of course that's for good reason, because we're sitting now on top of this incredibly combustive material, and that will stay armed. The escape system will stay armed through orbital insertion, and either the ground or the crew can send that command. It has 8 Super Draco thrusters that fire in order to bring the crew to safety, and those thrusters are specific to the abort system, so they're only used for that abort system. The crew can actually hear it arm with like very loud thump, and then they can hear the fueling of the valves, and they can hear the flow of the fuel as well. There's a T-handle on board that the crew can activate if they needed to jettison themselves to safety. And we'll hear those calls once we have liftoff and we're getting into those different phases of abort. We'll actually hear Anne McLean make those calls, and we will know exactly where they are in terms of those flight phases for which aspects, which areas of the flight profile they're on.
We will hear that health check coming over the loops here in just about a minute, a little less than a minute.
You know, we think about these abort systems, and certainly it's something that we never want to have to use, but when we do have the few occasions when we do use them, it's actually an incredible test and gives us a lot of faith in these systems.
Yeah, that escape system I was reading can move Dragon half a mile in only 7.5 seconds, equivalent to a peak velocity of 436 miles per hour. I imagine in training, you've got to be ready for those kind of Gs.
Yeah, absolutely. We have some centrifuge training. Yeah, we have centrifuge training in order to familiarize ourselves with that G profile. So, for example, for me as a Soyuz flyer, we went up to about 8 Gs, and that is to prepare for any off-nominal entry. Normally an entry, like for my entry, I experienced only about 4.1 Gs during the landing profile. And you're also, in the Soyuz, you're also practicing if you had to control that descent and the trajectory of that descent. You know, we talk about these abort systems, and it really reminds me of Nick Hague's and Alexei Ovchinin's abort in 2018, and that was on the Soyuz, of course. And again, it was, of course, a pretty scary moment for all of us, but in the end, a wonderful testament to these systems. This is why they exist. And in that case, there was a problem with a rocket, and it happened at about 30 miles up. They went up to about 50 miles, and after the escape system had fired, they experienced around 6.5 to 7 Gs, and then they came back safely to the Earth. So pretty interesting test of that. Again, not something we ever want to use, but certainly something that's a very vital component to all of these launch systems.
I remember that well. Was some anxious moments there, and your fellow classmate from your astronaut class, Nick Hague, was right. So I'm I'm sure you got the full story on that.
Yeah, I remember it very well as well. We were in Russia. I was training for my flight. I was there with Christina Cook as well, and we were viewing it from a small control room that we have at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center. So we were paying attention to that whole launch sequence, and we started getting some indications that things were a little outside of the ordinary. And I'll never forget that moment when Nick was back. I mean, he was back with us at the cottages in which we live in Star City in a very short amount of time. And I remember coming back from class and jumping off my bicycle, and both Christina and I ran over to him and just gave him the biggest hug. And it just seemed so strange to see him back there when we knew that he was supposed to be leaving the planet for quite some time. And that was
Right.
just, the day prior. So here's a good shot of the crew members. They have ingressed the vehicle, they have completed the pressure checks of their spacesuits, and the hatch has been closed. So we are standing by, getting ready for the propellant load pull, which would be the next big milestone for the crew today.
Dragon SpaceX for post-ingress briefing.
SpaceX Dragon, go ahead.
Just wanted to give you a quick update. We are still discussing the hydraulic system performance. They did finish those kinematics tests and they look nominal, but we are still in discussions and evaluating the system for flight readiness. But otherwise, F9 and Dragon are tracking no other issues for flight.
SpaceX Dragon, crew copies all. Thank you.
So you've just heard that update from the SpaceX teams. They are still monitoring the hydraulics for the clamp arm system that's holding the Falcon 9 in place. And so still making some evaluations there. The good news is they're not tracking any other technical issues. So hopefully we will get to a good place with this one and can continue on toward a launch today. Speaking of launches, NASA and SpaceX joint launches, there was a very interesting launch just last night from the Vandenberg Air Force Base on a Falcon 9, and that was the Sphere X and Punch missions. The Sphere X is a spectrophotometer that is really looking at the history of the universe, and it is using near-infrared spectrometry as a near-infrared space observatory that's going to be what's providing comprehensive all-sky survey of the near-infrared spectra of 450 million galaxies. So really cool stuff here that it's basically a telescope that's taking images of our skies in the infrared and providing a map of the universe, and it will allow us to interpret a sort of history of our skies, as one of the scientists described, like time travel, so that we will see what happened even 1 second after the Big Bang and start having a better understanding of the origins of the universe. Another system that was on board the same rocket was the Punch experiment. That's 4 small satellites that are looking at the solar corona. So that's the outer atmosphere of the sun, and will give us a lot more insight into what is happening in that layer of atmosphere on the sun. So some really incredible scientific instruments that NASA and SpaceX launched together just last night. Another view of the crew here waiting patiently for their next update.
Jessica, the Dragon spacecraft Endurance will take Crew 10 to space today, and as we've been talking about, it's the 4th flight for the capsule. Since its first flight in 2021 for Crew 3, SpaceX's Endurance Dragon has been a workhorse for NASA's Commercial Crew program, flying mission after mission. It has safely carried astronauts to the International Space Station. With Crew 7, Endurance proved its reliability yet again, marking its 3rd journey to orbit. In all, Endurance has flown 10 astronauts and 2 cosmonauts to and from the International Space Station, and it's supported crews from NASA, ESA, JAXA, and Roscosmos. And we are currently at 1 hour and 19 minutes until liftoff of Crew 10 on a Falcon 9 rocket to the International Space Station. 1 astronaut and 1 cosmonaut will be the latest crew to fly as part of the NASA Commercial Crew program. The program uses private companies to transport people to and from the orbiting lab from U.S. soil. We've had a good countdown so far. Weather is almost perfect, 95% go. We do have an issue that SpaceX is looking at on the ground side. It has to do with the hydraulic system for the clamp arms. One of the clamp arms. Clamp arms hold the Falcon 9 rocket to the transporter erector. They have been giving the crew inside Endurance updates as they've been going along. and they're going to give them another update here soon. We know that they also let the crew know that they would be testing that hydraulic system. No danger to the crew at all in order to test that system. So they went ahead and cycled those valves. They're gathering data and continuing to work that. They have up until the launch escape system arm, which is T-minus 45 minutes, to make a call. Just get inside the spacecraft. It's pretty calm inside there, as we've been seeing, the crew. But what are you feeling in a moment like this?
You know, I think it's probably different for everybody. You know, maybe as the commander and the pilot are probably kind of rehearsing the big things that they're going to be monitoring on those displays. I know that for me, in the left seat of the Soyuz, there was, you know, quite a choreography and procedures that we're following every step of the way. And so I was paying very close attention to everything that was happening on my screen. And, you know, just preparing to follow along and do all the things that we had done in all the training and all of the simulations. And we are thinking about everything that's going to happen, you know, thinking about what happened earlier today, saying goodbye to our family members, and most likely